got diagnosed with POTS and Ehlers Danlos syndrome. So if you don't know what POTS is, first off, it stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And you're like, wow, that's a mouthful. So basically POTS is postural. So positions from sit to standing, you'll have high heart rate and low blood pressure. Some experience hypertension, others experience hypotension. If you can hear my pump going off, I'm currently hooked up to doing one of my infusions right now. POTS is just crappy. You can get dizzy easily, you can have fainting, syncope episodes, which I do as well. POTS is just, it can be so debilitating for some, and then other people have POTS and doesn't affect them their entire life. It definitely varies from patient to patient and case to case. POTS is rare, but honestly kind of common. 200,000 cases are reported of POTS a year, and if you do want to know more about POTS, I will also leave in the description down below a link about Ehlers Danlos syndrome, but people can suffer from dislocations, joint pain, chronic pain. A lot of people with Ehlers Danlos syndrome, not all, but a lot, have gastroparesis because your stomach is formed of connective tissues. There are just so many different comorbidities that Ehlers Danlos syndrome can cause, and I feel like it's really not well known or talked about. A lot of people can lose their eyesight because eyes are connective tissues. A lot of people have to eventually become wheelchair bound or have surgeries or have to get NJ tubes. If you don't know what an NJ tube is, it's a feeding tube that goes around your mouth, or a permanent feeding tube. A lot of people say if they're gastroparesis, which I also have gastroparesis, but that is a story for another day. A lot of people that do end up getting gastroparesis that eventually can't even tolerate feeding tubes or anymore, tolerate feeds, eventually have to be something called TPN. TPN, I don't know too much about, but basically you're being fed through your heart. It's total parental nutrition, I believe. I'll leave a link down below what TPN is too if you're interested, but TPN can be really hard on your organs. A lot of people become TPN dependent like forever. Hopefully I never get that way. So far I don't have any form of feeding tubes or alternative feeding. I am dependent through food, through my mouth. So now I'm going to tell you guys all about how I got diagnosed with POTS and Ehlers Danlos. So my story begins back from like childhood. I always had problems with my joints growing up. We're talking about Ehlers Danlos syndrome. We're gonna flip-flop back and forth. So I've always had problems with like joint pain, growing pains, all sorts of like just bad stuff. Like I always had stomach problems and constipation problems. I just had not the best like body symptoms all the time, if that makes sense. And I always had really high heart rate. Like, and if you can see, my hands are super sweaty right now, and this is also a form of having POTS. I have heat intolerance as well, excessive sweating. I don't know if you guys can see, but I sweat most of the time super bad. That point where I normally only can wear black and get away with it. If I threw on a pink shirt right now, within minutes, the sweat stains would be unbelievable. So I always dealt with super sweaty, clammy hands from the age of like, the first memory I can think of is from first grade, and doing a test and then all of a sudden being so frustrated that my hands are sweating, and they still sweat to this day, and I'm 21. Everyone told me I would outgrow it, and I didn't. So fast forward, I'm 17. I meet my now husband, Tyler, in January, and then I fall pregnant in June. I found out that I was pregnant June 1st, and I was super sick through my entire pregnancy, which I'm not sure if the nausea and vomiting was caused from stomach problems or if that was just pregnancy problems. But I started around the 20-week mark. My husband also left for the military, so he's not really around in this story very much because he was through basic training. So around the 20-week mark, I started to get like really ill. Like I couldn't breathe, my feet were swollen, I couldn't walk, and walking or standing up put me so out of breath. I felt like I was just gonna pass out all of the time. Like I just felt like there was no end to this. So eventually I kept going to my OBGYN and I was like, all these problems, and you know, that I'm getting migraines to the point where I can't see. I had to quit my job. I was actively working while I was pregnant. There were just a lot of issues going on in my pregnancy, you know, from being sick all the time to can't eat. I just had so many. My first pregnancy and my only pregnancy was so rough. So I didn't know anything about preeclampsia. So then I was around 29 weeks and I got hospitalized for an entire week. And they were like, you're gonna be put on bed rest, you do not get up, don't do anything. But they didn't tell me exactly like what was going on, right? So obviously I was super in nest mode. My first baby, it was Christmas time. It was like December 7th, I think, ish, around the time. And I was baking, I was nesting. My son was due to be born in February 4th was his due date. So I didn't really listen to medical advice. I was freshly 18, didn't really know any better. And I ended up getting full-blown preeclampsia. I'm not gonna go into too much about preeclampsia because there's so much to the story. I basically became hospitalized for about 2 weeks. I had to be induced at 34 weeks. At 32 weeks I got hospitalized, induced at 34 weeks, delivered 2 days afterwards. I was in labor for 2 days. It was so painful. That's a whole nother story. If you guys want to hear the labor and delivery story, let me know down below. I'll gladly share that with you guys. At this point, I had no diagnoses. I thought I was fine, normal, happy 18-year-old girl, just besides of having preeclampsia. And I delivered my son. He was in the NICU for 7 days. I delivered him on December 23rd. He got out of the NICU on New Year's Day, January 1st. So at that point, you know, I went home with long-term preeclampsia. And they kept me 7 days instead of like the normal 2 days that women stay after I delivered. But that turned into a couple months later, COVID just broke. And it was around March or April, I decided to do elderly caregiving. And I was still dealing with, you know, the after effects of preeclampsia and being a new mom. I just thought it was normal. I chalked it up to being normal. I didn't have anyone else to tell me different. So, you know, I go about my life and I start, you know, my high blood pressure is just getting worse and worse. And other times I would have really low blood pressure and my blood pressure was not stable. So eventually, and I was also having a really high heart rate. I was getting blacked out all the time, migraines. I just felt extremely tired and fatigued constantly, and I was super dizzy. I had so many symptoms I was dealing with on a daily basis, plus being a new mom, I couldn't keep up. So at that point, it was around, so I started work in March of 2020, and then around late August of 2020, I ended up having to be put on EDD, which is temporary disability. My blood pressure was so high. The highest it ever got was 80, I think it was 186 over 112. I think that was the highest it had ever gotten that I had documented, and I went to the ER. I had to go see a nurse practitioner. That was the only thing available at the time. So I went to see her, she checked it. It was still super high despite being on labetalol, I think that's what it was. And I was on a really high dose and we could not get it down. At that point, she was like, you need to be on disability. I ended up staying on temporary disability from August to March. So like 10 and 11 this month. I don't know, probably like 9 to 10 months I stayed on it. And then I was just tired. I wanted to go back to work and I really wanted to buy a new car. All the stimulus that just came out. Basically, that entire time of being on disability, I was at home sick. My husband had to continue to leave work. It was awful. I felt like I was gonna pass out and black out all the time. I couldn't control myself. I couldn't regulate myself. Plus having to be a stay-at-home mom and take care of a baby. It was not fun. I was sick constantly. My husband's job was getting fed up that he would have to leave because I couldn't take care of myself. At being almost 19 at that point, well, was 19, it was just ridiculous. So fast forward now, we're in March of 2021. And I decide I am not sick anymore. Also, throughout all of this, I was also experiencing like joint pain, constipation issues, GI issues, nausea, vomiting. I was experiencing a lot of different symptoms. I got my first dislocation December of 2020, and it was my shoulder. I just like little things like that. So I was also starting to progress with my Ehlers Danlos syndrome and my not known gastroparesis. So so we're in March. I decided, all the stimulus that just came out, I wanted to go back to work. I couldn't get a car financed that I wanted, having, disability income. So, I ended up getting a job, started working as an elderly caregiver again, which I really, really loved. If you don't know that about me, I take care of old people. I take care of your elderly family. And that turned into me working from March all the way down to October 1st. So during that time, I was seeing cardiologists. I was seeing tons of people all of the time, different cardiologists, specialists, neurology, basically we were all looking in the wrong direction. Like we had no idea. So around that time, I got my service dog, which his name's Chowder. I guess he's out in the living room with my husband. I thought he was on the bed. I thought he was right here. And I got a service dog to help with my hypertension because I experienced both. Hyper, which is high, and then hypo, which is low blood pressure. So I experienced both. So I was like, I didn't really know about heart rate during this time, but I had a friend that made service dog gear. And she was like, dude, it sounds like you have POTS. And I was like, no, dude, stop. Like, I didn't believe in like the rare illness thing. Like, did not. So she was like, just read it. Just like, come on. Just like, she sent me some links and I was like, okay. And then after looking on TikTok, looking on YouTube, different forms of social media, talking to people that have POTS, describing my symptoms, I decided in my brain that I have POTS, and I brought it to a cardiologist, which he was like, no, POTS that's non-existent. You just need to eat salt, drink water, total medical gaslit in a bubble. It was demeaning. Like, I just felt like I had been suffering for almost a year and a half at this point, basically since before my son was even born. Which also, side note, Ehlers Danlos syndrome can cause preterm labor, preeclampsia, and premature death, if you don't know. But just back to that. So we go, and I'm like, I don't want to see you anymore. But during that time, I also had heart monitors on. My heart rate was exceeding 180 beats per minute to 200 beats per minute. And he was like, you're fine. You're just working out and you're not telling anyone. Like, I'm like, I literally don't work out. And I was also heavier set at that time. I was emotionally eating a lot. I was really, really depressed. My mental health was garbage. So I ended up, just being told to lose weight, eat healthy, like basically everything to go away, shoo me under the rug. So I found a new cardiologist and I was like, I really think I have POTS. Unfortunately, he was in the same, it was like in the same like building, like they shared like an office together. So I ended up being referred to him, and I was like, I really think I have POTS, like please help me. He was like, I can't do anything for you, but based on your results and everything else, I could see how you think you're a candidate for POTS. Going down to Stanford, and then at this point, this was October. So basically October of 2021, I had a massive POTS episode while I was at work. So like I was saying, I had a massive POTS episode while I was at work. And I worked 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. alone with memory care patients, Alzheimer's, dementia, aggressive, sometimes not aggressive, I was alone, and you work alone with 5 to 6 clients. That's just how the job worked, which I was fine with. And I liked the hours. I liked being alone. But at that point, it was really scary because the business was super short-staffed. They couldn't get anyone to come in. I was alone. I was having a POTS episode. If I left, it would be considered elderly abandonment or elder abuse, so I couldn't call 911. My boss lived 2 hours away from me, and she ran a different care home, so she couldn't do anything for me. So I was basically stuck there just having, and at this point I was undiagnosed, but I had a service dog, and they let my service dog come with me to work. If you go on my TikTok, which I'll link it right here, you can scroll and you can see videos of me and Chowder while I was working those shifts, and I was training him. I used a lot of that time for that. Anyways, so I had to tough it out. The next morning I went to the ER. I ended up, having a really crappy primary care physician. She was a nurse practitioner that wasn't the same one that put me on temporary to begin with. She was really new. She was also super pregnant and didn't care, I guess. She was waiting for her leave to come so she could leave. She actually never came back, fun fact. So I had to find a new guy. But it was just so awful. I was fainting, I was passing out, I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was having a heart attack. My mind was hurting so bad. I had blood pooling no matter what I did. I was just seeing black spots and vertigo. The episode was so bad, nothing I had experienced before. It was unmanageable. So, when I'm telling her about all this, she's like, you're fine. Are you sure you're not pregnant again? Because those symptoms can also line with preeclampsia. So she never put me back on temporary disability. Nothing ever really happened. I had to quit my job though, because also July of 2021 was my first time ever fainting. It was awful and scary. So at that point, I had been fainting. It was no longer safe for me to continue to try to work taking care of people's loved ones. So I just became a full-time stay-at-home mom. My husband took 2 jobs and worked. So, we could still live in our home. And then I started trying to push myself more on social media, trying to build that. And I have 18.6K on TikTok right now, which I think that's an accomplishment in itself. I've grown quickly. Hopefully I grow quickly on YouTube too, but that's what my job was. I was never making any money, but that was my goal. That was, me and my husband were like, well, maybe, you can try to make money off of this. And I was like, okay, well, that has not happened yet, just so you guys know. And then I just was experiencing all sorts of crazy things all the time, and then my stomach problems got so much worse. Oh, at this point, I had an appointment with Stanford January 24th of 2022, so of this year, the year we're in now. So basically, we just had to make it to that date, and it was rough, and it was hard, and I felt really lonely, and it was just, my relationship with my husband also wasn't really good at that time because, I was home all day with the baby, and then I was super tired, and he was working, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. and we never got to see each other, and it was just a really hard time physically for me. It was just, chronic illness can take a lot on the people that you depend on and relationships, and I don't think a lot of people talk about that. So at this point, I had no real medical information for intervention. So fast forwarding, we're at Stanford. I see the neurologist and I'm explaining to him all of my symptoms. I'm like, I think I have POTS. Here is my tilt table, my positive tilt table. I had tons of testing done for all of this. Here's my stress test that I fainted on after 2 minutes and my heart rate got up to 178. You know, like, here's all of this medical documentation, take it, please. He was like, you have POTS, but I want to do more studies to see if you're having absent seizures, which I have not been able to get back down to Stanford because it is a long drive and my car is not reliable enough, unfortunately, to make it down the drive. So I'm kind of just waiting for the opportunity where I'm able to do that. So I don't know if I'm having absent seizures like he's maybe thinking, but he diagnosed me with POTS, and then he started looking through my chart and started asking me like weird questions. At this point, I had no idea what Ehlers Danlos syndrome was. None whatsoever. It was kind of like weird. So I'll tell you how it went. He was like, can you do this? And I was like, yeah. He's like, can you do it on this hand? I was like, yeah. He's like, I don't know if I can like show you guys on camera, but like, can you do that? And I was like, yeah. And he was like he's like, go like this. So I was like, okay. And I did that. And he, had me hyperextend my knees and like do these weird things. Also, another weird thing about Ehlers Danlos syndrome, if you have a smaller palate, that's also another sign of a connective tissue disorder, which I do have a very, very small mouth. I've been told that by all the dentists my entire life. I also have really, really bad teeth. Really, really bad. And then if you don't know, another sign of a connective tissue disorder, there's these little fat pockets on the bottom of your feet. When you stand up on your ankles, heels, they're like little fat pockets, which are another sign of a connective tissue disorder. He asked me if I've ever dislocated in my life. Like I said, the first time I ever dislocated my shoulder. He asked me if anyone else in my family has all of these different issues, and no one else in my family has diagnosed Ehlers Danlos syndrome at the time. So I was like, no. So I got a 7 out of 9 on the Bain scale. So he diagnosed me with Ehlers Danlos syndrome, hypermobility type. So I got diagnosed with POTS and Ehlers Danlos syndrome on the same day. And I didn't really know like what to do with that information. He made it really sound like scary, like most people with EDS don't live past like 50, like your life expectancy. Like, he made it sound really scary. He also told me that I'm pretty sure you have gastroparesis at that time. Go see the GI specialist across the hall. Like, he was like boom, boom, boom about it. And I was like, oh my God, this is terrifying. I was so scared in that appointment, and I was alone with Chowder. My mom and my little brother ended up taking me, but because of COVID, they weren't allowed to come in. And my husband and my son were at home, and it was just such a nerve-wracking appointment to deal with all at once. So now we're in the times we are, which I believe today is October 24th, 2022, and I have POTS, Ehlers Danlos syndrome, which I'll list it right here for you guys. MCAS, which is mast cell activation syndrome. You can see more about that on my Instagram and my TikTok. It's basically, I don't have issues right now, but I had a PICC line in my arm. I don't know if you guys can see, but I have scarring from a reaction that I had. And I have gastroparesis, hypoglycemia, just tons and tons of stuff is going on. Right now I have a Hickman's catheter. It's a central line. It is a double lumen, which I am currently connected to an IV. It's basically like a permanent IV, but this is my pump, and then this is my infusion. I do 2 liters every single day, and I do a total of 8 hours hooked up, and it is a lot, and it's exhausting. If you guys want to see my infusion bag and stuff, I have that linked down below too. But if you guys have any other questions or comments, or if you want me to elaborate any more, definitely let me know, and don't forget to like and subscribe and comment down below, and don't forget to turn the post notifications on. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great night.